In Prometheus, we learn that it was the engineers who guided and modified what would become the human race, but then for some unknown reason, they chose to destroy us. Was mankind to the engineers simply an experiment, a curiosity not worth keeping, or was there more to the story, something hinted upon, yet left for later sequels and possibly lost in subsequent drafts? Many of us within the Alien fandom have often wondered if there were separate groups or factions within the engineers. Well, Jon Spaihts, the co-writer for Prometheus, confirmed in a recent podcast that he and Ridley both like the idea of a schism within the engineers, an idea that clears up some of their mystery. Jon Spaihts was the initial writer for Prometheus, and he worked with Ridley Scott on the groundwork and world building for the early prequel universe. He was recently on the Script Apart podcast where they were talking about his work on Alien Engineers, an early draft for Prometheus, and in it he explains that built into the premise of Prometheus is an implied schism among the engineers themselves. If they played the role that Holloway is certain that they have, that they may have been meddling very intimately with human development both biologically and culturally for eons. And they have, by implication, molded us into their own image. Our faces look like theirs. Their faces don't look like ours. They were first. They bent humanity towards themselves. It was a hubristic project. And yet, here is this death ship, and here's its navigation system aimed at Earth, with this harbor of perfect predators, of such a design that they could ravage our planet, killing only the humans, leaving the rest of the biosphere intact, essentially erasing the engineers' project perfectly. Well, why? That's very interesting. And one argument might be that they, like laboratory scientists, had concluded some experiment, and just like laboratory scientists that calmly decapitate the white mice that they've been meddling with for months to study their brains, they are ready to wrap up their experiment in a tidy manner. But Ridley and I were more excited by the prospect that there was faction among these people, and that there was among the engineers a Prometheus-like figure who was excited about the notion of elevating a more primitive species to essentially take the engineers' place. And part of our idea was that the engineers as a species were approaching a moment of transition, a childhood in, like leveling up, perhaps out of the physical plane and into a more energetic sphere, or perhaps out of this universe and into another. That they've played all the games that they could play in this big sandbox and are headed for greener pastures. And that the Prometheus wanted to bequeath the universe that they had left to inheritors, and inheritors of not just some of the technology and some of the culture, but even of the DNA of the engineers themselves. But on the other side of this schism, there are abolitionists among the engineers who find this experiment blasphemous and profane and beneath the dignity of their species. And that's a nice cold spring that can create conflict and consequence in subsequent installations of the story. The notion that there are sympathetic and unsympathetic engineers towards the human project. He even goes on to say, when talking about early ideas for a follow-up to Alien Engineers, that there was a war in heaven between the engineer factions. Now, before we unpack all this, again, this is from an earlier script of Prometheus when it was going by the title of Alien Engineers. Later on, when Damon Lindelof was brought on board as co-writer, some important plot points were switched up. For example, at the time, LV-426 was the story's main setting, with the idea that it could, and eventually would be, changed to LV-223. So when I refer to LV-223, instead of calling it LV-223/LV-426, I'll simply call it the Moon. So Jon tells us that he and Ridley both like the idea that there are factions within the engineers, calling them either good or bad angels in terms of how they viewed mankind. Now, the engineer at the beginning of Prometheus, from the oval-shaped ship, who sacrifices himself to create or modify the humans, is obviously Prometheus or one of his followers. And if they aren't part of the good angels group, then the engineers as a whole may not be the planet seeders that many saw them as. And humans may have been their only creation. Cut footage from the sacrificial scene does include other engineers, but we'll come back to them in a minute. We then have the last engineer, or the last survivor of the Juggernaut crew on the Moon, who David eventually wakes up. He is obviously one of the bad angels, as he is sickened by the sight of humans and David, and attacks them soon after he is woken up. Looking to Alien Covenant, we have the engineers on Planet 4. There are those that see them as a seeded race, like the humans, but they are confirmed to be engineers by the actors who played their parts and by Ridley Scott himself. But are they good angels or bad ones? Here are just a few possible scenarios of how I think the engineer factions may be aligned. Set 1. There are 3 groups of engineers: the good angels, the Prometheus group, and the bad angels. The Prometheus group seeded Earth, and they and the good angels have left the universe or were killed off. The Prometheus left instructions for humans to find an outpost of theirs, as we know they keep their home planet location hidden. But they have ascended or died off before the humans arrive. The Planet 4 engineers are the bad angels, and they take over this moon outpost and use the alien to destroy the work of Prometheus or the humans. Set 2. There are 2 groups. The Prometheus is part of the good angels, and then there are the abolitionists, the bad angels. The good angels seeded Earth, meaning that seeding planets is normal for the engineers and that there may be other worlds with similar beings. They leave instructions to find their outpost on the moon, but they are gone before the humans arrive. The bad angels are on Planet 4, and they take over the moon outpost, using the alien to destroy the humans. Now, these first 2 sets may be more likely to be right, as they may line up with the kind of technology used by each group as seen in the films, be it biomechanical or mechanical. Both the Moon and Planet 4 groups would use biomechanical juggernauts, with the Moon engineers also seen wearing the biomechanical pressure suits. Even Planet 4, at least in the Alien Engineer's script, contains biomechanical Giger-like architecture. In contrast, the Prometheus group is only seen using the Oval Saucer, a mechanical ship with no biomechanical nature, and they aren't seen wearing pressure suits. But if the technology used isn't a factor, here are 2 more scenarios for engineer alignment. Set 3. There are 3 groups: the good angels, the Prometheus group, and the bad angels. The Prometheus group makes the humans, leaves instructions to the outpost moon, and leaves or is killed off. The Planet 4 group are the good angels who haven't left yet or are preparing for the journey. The bad angels have taken the moon outpost and used the alien to destroy the humans. And then there is Set 4. There are 3 groups: good angels, Prometheus group, and bad angels. The Prometheus group makes the humans, leaves instructions to the moon outpost, and is now on Planet 4, possibly staying behind to watch the humans. The bad angels have taken the moon and used the alien to destroy the humans. Now, I'm sure there are other possible alignments, but you get the point. I also assume here, for simplicity's sake, that the moon was originally an outpost or way station that was later turned into the dangerous bioweapons facility, as there would need to be a reason why we were invited there so long ago by our creators when it's currently controlled by the bad angels. As for the 2 sizes of engineers, we see large engineers with both the Prometheus group and the Moon group, and we see the smaller ones on Planet 4 and, as I mentioned earlier, in a cutscene with the Prometheus group. If this idea of factions within the engineers survive from the early ideas and on into Alien Covenant, I do wonder if David knows about it. He learned much of the engineers during his long stay on the Juggernaut in transit from LV-223 to Planet 4, and if he does know about it, there's a possibility that he wiped out Planet 4 for their stance on mankind, especially if it was pro-human, though I'd be willing to bet that he'd wipe them all out regardless. It could also mean that mankind has yet to meet a good angel, and there may not even be any of them left in our universe. This good or benevolent angel faction may even explain earlier thoughts on the space jockeys where they were seen as peaceful. In the book of Alien, the actors and crew would note that they felt instinctively that the space jockey was a benign creature, though they couldn't say why. And in the novelization of Alien by Alan Dean Foster, Ash describes the space jockey's race as a noble people and hopes that mankind will encounter them under more pleasant circumstances. Even Alien's writer Dan O'Bannon and the creator of the Xenomorph, H.R. Giger, both saw the space jockey race as friendly and sympathetic. They were not creators of mankind and were just another victim of the alien. Strangely enough, there is an Easter egg backing up the idea of engineer warring factions during Mission 8, Rampart, from the Aliens Colonial Marines game. If you shoot at the pilot's head inside of the derelict ship, it will activate a holographic battle between a ship similar to the Juggernaut and the oval ship used by the Prometheus group, otherwise called the Vast Black Ship or the Pebble. I know many of you will say that you thought this existed all along, but it's nice to get some confirmation on the idea. What are your thoughts on engineer factions? Or if you want to hear the Script Apart podcast where this information came from, I'll have links to both down in the description. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, your likes, shares, comments, and subscriptions go a long way towards helping the channel grow. Take care, and I hope to see you next time.